So Following Sunshine is the book. Why is it called Following Sunshine?
I'm from Ireland, and I grew up in the country where it's very beautiful when the sun shines, but most of the time it's either raining or low cloud or that kind of feeling. And when I was 12, my parents took me on my first overseas holiday, and that was to Spain, and it was in the middle of the winter. And I looked up and I saw the blue sky and the sunshine. I was like, wow, there are countries where the sun shines even in the winter. When I'm old enough, I'm going to go follow the sun. And it kind of became the mantra for my life, if you like. And also at the time, I didn't understand that there was such a thing called seasonal affective disorder. And now I've never been diagnosed with it, but I certainly know that when I'm in blue sky and sunshine, I'm happier than when I'm in gray cloud and rain. So hence the name Following Sunshine. And then the subtitle is actually my journey, because the first part is a voyage around the mind, around the world, and around the heart.
How much sailing experience would you say you have?
At the time, I was volunteering. So at the time, I had a little bit of experience working on boats, because I was also a scuba instructor and had worked on the Florida Keys for a number of years with that. And I had taken a year out to go volunteer traveling around the world. And the final project was to help a solo sailor crew his boat from Florida to the Bahamas. And that was only supposed to last a month. And I had a little bit of experience from a volunteer project I had done down in Tonga for a few months. And that was on a catamaran, but I'd never actually really understood, you pull this line because, and then this happens, etc. So I didn't really learn how to sail properly, say, until I got on the sailboat and I was crewing for Captain Gary. And as it turned out, we ended up crewing and sailing on that sailboat for 6 years.
Tell us a little bit about the differences that culturally people have between monohulls and catamarans.
Well, the monohulls themselves, the one we were on was 40-foot space. And the catamarans can be the same length, but it's almost like two boats in one, because you've got a lot more space. We used to joke when we would go ashore and we'd be going to like a little barbecue or something like that. You could tell instantly the people who lived on a sailboat versus the people who lived on a catamaran versus the people who lived on a trawler. The people who lived on the sailboat, had little cupboardy kind of space. You'd roll up your t-shirts and your shorts and that was it. People who lived on a catamaran kind of had hanging closets. And then you go one step further. For people who lived on a trawler, they had like a stand-up fridge. They had all the extras, and it was like, oh, if they have a crease in their shorts, they're on a trawler and not on a monohull. You're at the mercy of the elements. And so everybody, when they're at sea, will help each other out. So there is no disparity in something like that as to who's on what kind of a boat. We're all literally in the same boat. When you're talking about weather and trying to find somewhere safe to anchor, you're literally all in the same boat. So people do reach out and help each other if they've got a problem. One of the problems we had, believe it or not, was with the head, like the marine toilet on the boat. And that's the only time you'll find sailors out there, and there'll be a stampede in the opposite direction if you ask for help for the toilet. And there was one time we were in an island called Concepcion it's part of the sanctuary over in the Bahamas. And there was only about six boats in that area. We all came together for a cocktail hour one evening, and Gary was talking to them about, I've got this problem. And you could see them kind of leaning in, like, because we're out in the middle of nowhere. There's nowhere to get any other help. Maybe they would help us. And he had the misfortune of turning around and saying something like, well, in the other head. And they went, wait a minute, you've got two heads on board. You're on your own.
Captain Gary.
Captain Gary, exactly. So it was through a website for volunteering. And I, as I said, had been around the world volunteering through this website called workaway.info, where the concept was you volunteered 5 hours a day, 5 days a week in exchange for food and lodging. And like I said, I had made a decision I was going to travel, sort of circumnavigate, if you like, even though by plane. Started out in London and made, a complete trip around the world. And like I said, I was about ready to settle down. And I just found this one last project. And while I was sending out resumes, I thought, I'll just do this for a month. And so the funny thing about it is, when I applied for it, family and friends turned around to me and they said, are you absolutely insane? You're going to go to sea with somebody you've never met before. How do you know he's not an axe murderer? And then people were saying to him, well, you don't know who she is. She could be a modern day pirate about ready to steal your boat when you're like 12 miles offshore. So it was an interesting lesson for me. I mean, I've learned with all my travels now is you just learn to trust your instincts and your gut. And you can't allow other people's fears kind of infiltrate and stop you from doing what you're trying to set out to do. And the same with him. So that's how I came on board, was to help him out and to solo, because he was solo at the time, and help him get the boat across to the Bahamas.
Yeah, you were lucky to have met him, and then in the end, you married him.
In the end, I married him. There's a line in the book in Following Sunshine where it says, I learned pretty quickly that Gary was allergic to pecans and relationships. And he's still allergic to pecans. But it's funny that neither of us were looking for a relationship at all. And yet, when you live 24/7 in a 40-foot space and you've got no cell phone, no internet, and you've got to rely on each other for your safety, you get to know each other from the inside out. And what we would do in the evenings after all the work was done and we'd put dinner away, we would sit and we would talk. And we learned we had some very deep, profound conversations, but we also identified that we had a lot in common in terms of our outlook on life. And the more we talked, the closer we became. And, it became a very solid friendship. And then it turned into like a little bit of a romance. And like I said, at the end of the 4 months, we brought the boat back to America. Gary's going back to California to be with his friends and family. And I was actually heading to Ireland for a reunion. And he said, well, while you're waiting to go, you can stay on the boat, etc., for a couple of weeks. And I went, okay, great. And because I was, full-time writing at that point as well. And it wasn't, I guess we had said goodbye to each other. And about 3 weeks later, he calls up and he said, do you want to sail up the rest of the east coast of America? And then we jumped on a plane and he came with me to Ireland. And then, he suddenly, I think it was 4 years later, on the deck on Thanksgiving down in Bequia in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, he proposed on the deck. And then we got married the following year.
That is a great story. It's a wonderful story and you describe it in the book. When you were writing the book, who were you thinking would be the target audience?
A couple of different angles on that. One of the reasons is, yes, it's my story, but really the framework was to show people how you can really gain a lot from traveling and learning from other communities, and how it actually helps your own journey through life, and lessons learned from other cultures, etc. So that was kind of the reason to kind of show those ideas. And also the other reason I really was behind writing is to tell everybody it's never too late, and never put off a dream. There's a section in there about one of my biggest, bucket lists, if you want to call it, was to go to Bora Bora. And I kept putting it off because 2 reasons. One, it's the honeymoon capital of the world. And number 2, it has a voracious appetite for your wallet and your purse and your bank account, because it's quite expensive. And eventually I found a way to live on the main island in Bora Bora for 8 days in a little pension, and, food from a food truck, etc. And when I got there, I actually did a day pass out on one of the main resorts. And for all the things I was scared of being there by myself instead of, as part of a couple, I looked around, I had the entire place to myself. And the reason was I had forgotten that everybody was on their honeymoon. So they were all back in their overwater bungalows honeymooning. So I had the entire place to myself. And that was one of the biggest lessons I learned, is never put it off.
That's true. You got to do it because life goes by quickly. It's amazing. So are you thinking about writing another book after this?
Well, I have another book that I'm curating at the moment because I run a writers group. And so I have a book coming out next May with a collection of short stories called Stories of Place. But I have while we were on the boat and we were in Antigua, we witnessed 2 men come ashore having rowed a 20-foot boat across the Atlantic Ocean. And I took an amazing photograph, as it turned out. It was just happenstance. I was able to take this photograph of them the moment they held their flares up. And that's the title of that book. That's already out. And that's their story. And I wrote that. It's a true story about what they overcame. But I wrote it to read like a novel, but also not about how they did it, but about why they did it and how it affected their families and how the experience changed them as a human being. So that book's out at the moment as well. And so Following Sunshine now technically is the prequel to it, because it brings us right up to the moment where I took that photograph and we invited them onto our boat for dinner and we got to know the 2 lads, Paul and Phil.
That's fabulous. Now, it is a fun book to read, especially if you like sailing and to me, I really enjoyed learning about all the different cultures that you met along the way and all the different adventures that you had along the way. I recommend it. If people want to know more or get a sample of the book, where should they go?
The best place is to go directly to my website, which is thewriteronthewater.com. So www.thewriteronthewater.com. And on the first page, they'll find all the links to get the book in all the various different outlets, Amazon and Barnes and Noble and everywhere. And also there's an audiobook on Audible as well for that. And thankfully, I got a chance to narrate the audiobook as well.
Niamh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your book, and I wish you the best on your next adventure. Are you going to go sailing soon?
We actually sold the sailboat, and we're in Florida now. We've got a small runabout boat, so we're taking the easy life on the water for a few minutes anyway.
Excellent. Well, pleasure meeting you and pleasure reading your book, and I recommend it to everybody.
Thank you so much, Francis. Lovely to be with you.